Psychologists today recognize childhood as a separate stage of life which can only be understood in its own terms, and they wonder why the Western world took so long, to see the folly of regarding children simply as small, inadequately socialized adults. I guess that's how the Western world saw them? Okay. Most psychologists, however, persist in regarding people 70 to 90 years old as though they were 35-year-olds who had just happened to have white hair and extra leisure time. Okay? But old age is fundamentally different from young adulthood and middle age, as childhood is a fact attested to by the organization of modern social and economic life. Surely it is time, therefore, to acknowledge that serious research into the unique psychology of advanced age has become indispensable. Is this an argument or a set of facts? Clearly an argument. The conclusion is we should research, right? Like if you were to summarize this argument, it's we should research old people because they're different, right? They're not the same. All right, so let's think about that for a second. If your initial claim was old people are different, could you logically, safely conclude that you should now research that? That is indispensable. No, what's the assumption there?
You should research what's different.
Yeah, you should research what's different. Maybe you just not care. Right? And people are like, what? That's offensive. No, like, maybe you're just, like, there's nothing in here that says you should research it. So when it says, which one of the following principles, if established, would provide the strongest backing for the argument, what type of question is this? This is a strengthening question, right? We're trying to support, it's a bottom-up question. We're trying to support the conclusion. I would go into the answers looking for something that says, like, if something's different from something else, then you should research it. Logan? Questions? Oh, stretching?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, A, whenever current psychological practice conflicts with traditional attitudes toward people, do the current psychological practices conflict with traditional attitudes? No, because right now, current psychological practice does not treat them as different, right? So if anything, they are the same. So I would stop here because it's like, well, it's not talking about the situation that we're talking about. B, whenever two groups of people are so related to each other that any member of the second group must previously have been a member of the first. Two groups are so related to each other, we're talking about how they're different. Are you guys cool with this? This is like, oh, well, the groups are so similar, the person from one of the groups must have been a member of the first group. Like, we didn't talk about that. Oh, actually, I did keep reading this because I underlined deviant. I was like, that's pretty funny. People in the first group should not be regarded as simply deviant members of the second. Okay, that's good to know. C, whenever most practitioners of a given discipline approach a particular problem in the same way. Are most practitioners approaching it in the same way? Maybe. Like most people are not treating old people as separate. They're treating them as the same. Given that possibility, I'm going to keep going. That uniformity is good evidence that all similar problems should be approached in that way. No, that would go against the conclusion, right? Because the author is saying, okay, the way you're doing it is wrong, we need to do it differently. Not that we should do it the same. D, whenever a society's economic life is so organized that two distinct times of life are treated as being fundamentally different from one another. So, is our society treating these two different times of life as different?
No.
Yes.
It says, but old age is as fundamentally different from young adulthood and middle age as childhood is a fact attested to by the organization of modern social and economic life. So apparently life, our social and economic life, is treating these two groups as different, or these two times of life as different. So whenever a society's economic life is so organized, and notice they talked about the organization of modern social and economic life, that two distinct times of life are treated as being fundamentally different from one another, I was a little hesitant about the word fundamentally, but different. Each time of life can be understood only in terms of its own distinct psychology. Now, if each time of life can be understood only in terms of its own distinct psychology, that means that you can't understand old age with the current psychology, because you need your own distinct psychology. Does that mean that you should get researching?
Yeah.
On some level, yes. Does it prove it? I wouldn't say that this proves it. If you say, hey, the only way to understand old people is through a distinct, unique psychology, well, that means what do you know for sure? Well, that means you can't understand old people with the current psychology. Does that mean, though, that you should research and unpack the new psychology? Not necessarily. But this isn't a question about which one's going to make the conclusion true. This is just which one is going to strengthen the argument the most, right? So if it's true that these two things are their own psychology, then that strengthens the conclusion that you should do research on them, even if it doesn't prove it. Okay? So I keep this one open. The thing about strengthen questions is you could come across an answer choice that strengthens it even more. So E, whenever psychologists agree that a single psychology is inadequate for two distinct age groups, okay, they did agree when it comes to children. They should be prepared to show that there are greater differences between the two age groups than there are between individuals in the same group. I don't. Was anyone tempted by this answer? I just had a realization as to why it might be tempting. Are you thinking, oh, because they should be prepared, they better do their research? So the problem with E is that the first part of it would only apply to childhood and regular life. Because, right, whenever psychologists agree that a single psychology is inadequate for two distinct age groups, they agree that it's inadequate for childhood and everyone else, right? Do they agree that it's inadequate for everyone else and older folks? No. So the whole rest of this answer choice would only be helpful if you're talking about doing research for children or the rest of society or everyone else, right? Because it says they should be prepared to show that there are greater differences between the two age groups, childhood and adulthood, than there are between the individuals in the same age group. Okay, and they're like, psychologists can go back and say, yeah, we are ready to do that. But we don't agree that there are differences between adulthood and old age. If answer choice E had said that, and then it said they should be prepared to show, then you'd be like, well, you better get researching it, because that's how you get prepared to show, right? So E is tempting. Unfortunately, it's talking about the wrong groups. Because right now the psychologists don't agree on the older group. So D is the strongest, does the most to strengthen. So were the tempting wrong answers E and what else? Or that's it? Okay. Other questions?